Welcome to Kelly Minds Her Manners, a podcast about real estate and entrepreneurship with a twist. Here's your host, Kelly Robinson.
Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Kelly Minds Her Manners. Today, I am introducing you to another superwoman, Kerrin Black. She's an international publicist with an entertainment background. She became a publicist accidentally. She never studied it. And her first client, she got 12 publications for in 3 months. So I think she might be a natural. I don't know. She also has a startup. She founded her own nonprofit organization when she was 21 years old. She comes from an entrepreneurial family and knew at the age of 19 that she was going to found her own business. She believes in empathy, giving back, loyalty, all the good stuff. And I can't wait for you to hear her story. So please welcome Kerrin Black. Kerrin, thank you so much for being on my podcast. Finally, we've been waiting so long to do this, and I'm super excited to have you today. So I really appreciate your time. I also know that it's quite late there in the UK.
Well, thanks so much for having me, Kelly. Thank you. Looking forward to the interview.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to sharing all of the amazing things that you've done with the audience because you've really done it all and you have such an entrepreneurial spirit. So you grew up in South Africa. You went to school there. You studied.
Yes.
You studied theater, you studied makeup artistry, you came from a family of entrepreneurs. So at what age did you know that you were going to have your own business?
I would say probably after I finished at Waterfront Theatre School and I'd been freelancing for production companies, mainly in the commercial space. And so yeah, and then I noticed, that there was a gap in the market and there was challenges with casting because my family's entrepreneurial. My mom started the first relocation company in South Africa after the 1994 elections.
Amazing.
And then, we've run commercial 5-star game lodges and, my dad's he's also been in the corporate world, as is my mom. But yeah, we all took the entrepreneurial. So I would say probably at around maybe 1920, that's when I kind of felt like, okay, this is the direction. And
yeah.
also, I've never enjoyed working for other people or being like micromanaged. So it's never been my thing. I like to work with people as a team, but I don't like being micromanaged.
Yeah,
being told what to do is not my cup of tea.
I can see that. I mean, full disclosure, Kerrin is my publicist. She's unbelievable. She's also now the publicist for Compass's sports and entertainment division, in addition to all of the other people that she pitches constantly to the top publications in the world internationally. And when I say that Kerrin is relentless when she is going for pitches, I am not kidding. And I mean that as a compliment.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you.
You are just like your follow-up skills, like your ability to get things done. I've never seen anything like it in my life. And it's a real talent that you have. So I definitely want to talk more about that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So, but first I want to talk about childhood. So what was it like growing up in South Africa in a family of business owners and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I mean, it was great. I mean, we weren't, I wouldn't say I came from like a poverty-stricken family or, I lived in, some shack somewhere. But, our parents or my parents obviously did the best to provide for us and we got to, be educated in private schooling. My brothers went to boarding school, top boarding school in South Africa, which was the family tradition because their father and grandfather and son went to Michael House. And I always wanted to be nearer to my brothers. So, also in every family you have conflicts. So I really just didn't want to be at home anymore. I really begged my parents to go to boarding school. So I did. I went to a co-ed boarding school in KwaZulu-Natal in a place called Moy River, which like there's like a Wimpy, and that's like one shop pretty much. Yeah. But we had good experiences, and I'm grateful for it because there was no mommy and daddy telling you to do homework. Like prep time was prep time. We had people will think, oh, it's like military, but it wasn't. Like I think the skills that you learn at boarding school is really amazing because you have to get up, you have to make your bed, you have inspection. We had like letter writing on Sundays where we had to write. We actually had to physically write, not like computer type, but physically write letters, physically post them. We had, laundry day was laundry day. And if you didn't take your laundry, you didn't have it done that week. So, there was lots of positive aspects to it. And we didn't have the distractions of, cinemas and nightclubs and all these things. And, everyone's got their own path, but you just really like focused on sport and your work. And we had our grades it would go like by standards, and so my standard 5 year we had an educational and environmental year, so you got to go on 4 trips in that year.
Wow.
So yeah, I mean it was really amazing, and they focused on like teaching you how to grow vegetables and all of these things. And I mean, I guess for people that came from the city, this was like, very weird for a lot of people, but there was a lot of good aspects to it.
Yeah.
I didn't enjoy school, to be honest. I hated it. I hated the academics. I was never an academic, but yeah, it was good from a training perspective because it taught you responsibility, and you didn't have, TV to distract you all the time, and you didn't have parents like saying, when it's homework, you had to do your homework in prep time, and if you didn't, you got detention, and that was that was that. But it was a good experience. But I didn't enjoy school. I hated it. So
yeah, absolutely.
Obviously, I didn't finish school because I wasn't a rebel. I didn't take drugs. I didn't do any of that stuff. But I really just didn't enjoy school, and I didn't fit in academically or any other which way. So I ended up leaving at the end of standard 7, and I begged my dad to go to Waterfront Theatre School in Cape Town. So I went from there to studying theatre school for 2 years, and then I did a 6-month makeup artistry. Coming from South Africa, we come from a very diverse culture and a very diverse background, and it comes with a lot of challenges, and for people that don't understand what it is to grow up in that environment. And I'm not even speaking from somebody like that grew up in a rural area with no food or had to walk to get water or had no electricity, but it does come with its fair share of challenges. But I think as South Africans, it's given us like an ability to just do everything, like fight for everything, and work really hard for what you want. And I mean, it in every culture you have that, but I think just due to the history of South Africa as well, it gives you a lot of, you have to dig really deep and fight really hard for what you want. So
absolutely. So when you went to theater school, were you studying acting? Were you studying more set design? Were you studying like costume design or makeup artistry, or was it like or lighting, or was it some of everything?
Yeah, so it was some of everything, but mostly like performance. So it would be acting, dancing, so a cross spectrum of all of those, and then also behind the scenes, sets and costumes, and learning about that aspect of theater. So it was diverse for sure.
So it
and
was like a conservatory program.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I understand what that's like. So after that, you went off to college.
Yes. So yeah, theater school was college for me.
Oh, okay. So it's conservatory for college. And then you went to study makeup artistry.
Yes. So you could either do it part-time for 1 year, or you could do it full-time for 6 months. So I chose the the latter option of 6 months full time. So that was also in Cape Town. So I think for me as well, the great part about it was obviously I was young, and I was 16 when I left school, and I went to Cape Town. So I had to learn how to budget. I had to learn how to we had these taxis called Ricky taxis.
Uh-huh.
And they were like open sort of taxis, and you'd have like maybe 5 or 6 people, so you'd call them and then they'd come, and it was like 9 rand one way, so whatever that is in dollars. But yeah, it was an interesting time. So yeah, so do the same for makeup as well. I mean, that was closer to where I was. But yeah, I was having to learn to budget. I would have to weekly shop. So while a lot of people who were still at school didn't even know how to open a bank account when they left school. So they weren't taught those skills, which I think even in today's age is lacking. But
Yeah.
like teach people about finance and money and managing money. And I was actually always very good with that. Even at boarding school, we'd get a certain amount of pocket money every term, and we'd have tuck boxes, and we'd keep them under the beds, locked up. And you'd have chocolates and all kinds of things, so because the food was so awful. So I think during the term most of us just lived off our tuck boxes because the food was really awful.
Yeah, I've heard that about boarding school.
Yeah.
And you then went on to work at, a pretty big company, but before that, you started the Faces of Hope Foundation, and you went away for years after a friend of yours got sick. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so in South Africa, which I think is very similar to America, is that obviously, you have to be on, well, if you can afford it, it's advisable to be on a medical insurance plan, because, otherwise you end up in a government hospital. You might go in, but you might not come out alive. So, because it is not good. So there was a gentleman that had been working with us because we were running a 5-star game lodge. He sort of became my best friend at the time. He was diagnosed in a transition period between 2 medical insurance companies, and therefore he couldn't get medical cover. So
My
it
gosh.
was just a nightmare. And then so obviously I tried to do some fundraisers, but people resist, and if it's not a registered charity. So that's where the inspiration for Faces of Hope came from. And then I started getting other families contacting me saying they were having similar issues where there was a shortfall, where the medical insurance wouldn't pay or cover certain cancer treatments. There was quite a difficult situation where I had about, I would say, 5 individual youngsters who had all gone through lymphoma, and they needed a specific drug. And sadly, in South Africa, it can take up to 8 years to get approval by the medical in South Africa. So even though it's FDA approved. So this is just where I feel it's very simple, like what the pharmaceutical companies do, because sadly, they say, okay, well, you can bring the drug in, but then you have to pay for it yourself. And in South African rands versus a currency which is tanks against every other currency is pretty bad. So some people managed to bring it in, but then that came with its own risks of side effects, horrendous side effects, by various pharmaceutical companies, which I won't mention on this podcast. But and so in fact the majority of those people sadly passed away because they couldn't access. And so there was actually 2 people that really stand out for me. The one was a young boy. He was about 4 or 5, and he had obviously been going to have cancer treatments, and he needed this specific drug. It was just such an inspiration. Kids just they just create, and so even when I would go and visit at the hospital, he would be making like little tents out of the pillows and things like that. So sadly, he passed away after fighting for a year. And then the one girl that really stood out for me, her name was Ndalu. She was an amazing young girl. Her dream was to become a journalist. And her mom actually called me the one day and she said, she's back in the hospital. And I went to the hospital. She was not in a good way at all. And, in the Black culture in South Africa, the grandmothers come and everybody comes. So one of the things I said to Ndalu is I said, because she knew, so she knew that she was not going to survive. So anyway, to cut a long story short, I ended up leaving because her father came from Durban because her parents were divorced. But they literally, before that, they called the mom in and the doctor called the mom in and she asked me to go in with her. And it's very hard because when a mother hears, but she doesn't really want to hear. And he just said to her, I don't know how much more fight your daughter's got. And she literally walked out of the doctor's room and she just cracked. And I said to her, whatever you do not cry in front of your daughter because she knows. And so I went home. And then one of the other nurses that was treating her when she used to go in for day treatments in Rosebank, it was weird. She called me at around, she just called me and she sobbed her eyes out and she said, Ndalu passed away.
No.
And so it was very hard, but, I tried my best and we had somebody come in and try to help her with her skin because the treatments were so bad that her skin, her skin on her leg was cracking like wallpaper.
Oh my gosh.
So IS Clinical was great. They had some great products and they brought people in. But, the way that they explained it was that, she had said to her mom she was thirsty. So her mom took the mask off and she sipped some water. And then she said, I don't know how much longer I can do this. And she closed her eyes and she passed away.
Oh.
So, everybody, like none of the nurses, no one could console each other because it was just, she impacted so many people.
I'm sure.
And then they asked me to speak at a funeral. And in Black culture in South Africa, funerals are a very big deal. And they have where, the body is where people will go for 5 days. People will come from all over the country to come and say goodbye. So that was my first experience of seeing, but she looked so peaceful, like her skin was all like porcelain. My grandma also, when I saw my grandma pass away as well, all her skin was like, all her wrinkles went out. So she was very at peace, but it was a very, very difficult thing to see. So, my passion for wanting to help people in that regard, because they just don't have the money and the government won't pay and the medical insurance companies won't pay, but yet, these CEOs make millions of whatever every year. So
I know.
Yeah, it was just to try to make an impact where I could without making it like we were a replacement for medical insurance, but more just to try to help. So we did do our best with what we had and what we could raise to help, some of the patients. So
yeah, well, that's amazing that you did that, and especially at such a young age to start a not for profit like that. A lot of people don't know how to handle things like that, and so they avoid them because it's too painful. But the fact that you went in, head first and just gave what you could is as a testament to you. And it also is so in line with 3 of your core values, which I believe are loyalty, empathy, and giving back. Right. So,
yeah,
so that's amazing. And then you've worked with other organizations at a high level that you didn't found, but that you really are passionate about.
Yeah, so my first initial actual encounter working with a nonprofit was Starfish Foundation, and that was actually started by a good friend of mine and a good friend of theirs. So both South Africans, but they were living in London at the time, and they started it. So that was more to help with HIV and AIDS, children and orphans, especially in South Africa, because what ends up happening is that a lot of the people or parents passed away from, they never say on their the death certificate that they died of AIDS, or, they died of pneumonia, they died of something else.
Right.
But a lot of the Gorgos, as they call them in South Africa, would end up looking after the kids because the parents had passed away or died. So that was my first real experience of working with a nonprofit in South Africa. And obviously they have it in UK, and then they expanded back into South Africa because they saw a need. So that was my first experience. And then obviously I volunteered for other, organizations, but those were my that was my first journey into the world of nonprofits.
Yeah, that's incredible. And so then you went on to work in the corporate world in entertainment.
Yes.
So tell us a little bit about how you got your first job in entertainment.
So what was interesting, I guess, I don't know whether you experience this, but when you study and you're all enthusiastic and then you leave and you graduate or you finish your diplomas or your degrees or whatever, and you go out and then you think you're going to get a job, and then reality sets in where it's like, well, you don't have any experience, so we can't give you the position. It's like, well, how do you get experience if you're not working in the industry that you want to work in, even as a runner? So what ended up happening was there was a production company up the road from where I lived called Velocity Films.
Yep.
And so I actually ended up making friends with, she was the office manager, her name was Yvonne. And then I just went back to her on several occasions, and then she'd say, the receptionist isn't in today, do you want to come in and reception? And so that's really how it started. And then I started getting more into behind the scenes of being a runner, assisting, on the production side of commercials and things. So that's really how that started. And that's where the inspiration came for talent finders, because I had seen how casting, they'd send the wrong height, the wrong demographic, the wrong age group, whatever. So I was like, well, what if we centralized a talent platform where by talent looking for exposure and those looking for talent can go to one platform? And then that was kind of where the idea for Talent Finders was birthed.
Yes, which is amazing. And you've done a lot with that. And the fact that you got your foot in the door at Velocity is so amazing. And I can believe it because I know you, and you don't give up. And I love that about you. And, not many people would have the guts to do that, but look at where it took you and the experience that it got you, and it all kind of came full circle, right?
Yeah.
So Talent Finders is something that you're still growing, which is amazing, but you're also a publicist. I don't know how you do all of it. And and you really have worked internationally with some of the biggest news channels, publications, fashion magazines, television shows, it all. So how did you get your first publicity gig? How did you get your first client, their first bit of press or a TV appearance?
Yeah, so that's a funny story because I never studied PR a day in my life. And so what happened was I was actually trying to find a South African who was living in New York or anywhere in the States that was an artist, because I wanted to raise money for my nonprofit in South Africa. And so I was told about this young artist, South African. He was living in New York at the time, and I reached out to him and I said, look, I'm trying to raise money for my nonprofit. It would be really great. I wanted to actually do an art exhibition and raise money in New York, because it was always a dream of mine to go to the States. I'd never been at that point. And so what ended actually happening was that Connor became my first ever client who I actually ended up working for, doing PR for at least 4 years at I didn't earn a dime. But what that did do is it helped me to put him on the map. And I literally got him into 12 publications in the space of 3 months. And I'd never done a day of PR in my life.
How did you do that? Like how did it even come to be? Were you trying to get him exposure so that his art could raise more money for the foundation? Like what or do you
that was pretty much it. I mean, his mom did fly me to New York for an exhibition that he had at one point in the States. I mean, I had to figure out where I was going to stay because I didn't have, really accommodation, and I couldn't afford it because the rate of exchange is just so terrible. So I ended up staying with, a friend of mine she's American, but she was living in South Africa, but she had an apartment in New York. Don't ask me where it is. I ended up staying there for, whatever, the 10 days that I was there. So that was also an interesting experience for me because when I landed at JFK, it was like everything was so big. I mean, America, everything is big, right? Like,
yeah,
just for the most part. So, you always see these NYPD, police vans in the movies and all of that. And then you get to JFK and you really see these things. So anyway, I eventually, get through border control and get to my hotel, and I'm like in this tiny box. I mean, you could barely swing a cat in it. And I ended up I ended up sitting there, and I was like, Kerrin, you either can sit here and be afraid, or you can just go out and you can just venture into New York and just figure it out and find your way. And as long as you know how to get back or you have the address written down somewhere,
yeah,
then, so I ended up doing that. So yeah, with Connor, it was different in the sense that I'd had like a couple of his bio and whatnot, and then I called because Forbes Africa is the same brand as Forbes America. They just have the license,
yeah.
and so I called people up there, and the editor at the time was really nice, and he said send me the information, and he really liked Connor's story, and so they say, okay, we'll feature him in the magazine. And it was the same for GQ. And then it went on, and, it was just, all kinds of things. And then he actually ended up getting recognized by Forbes under 30 in the US. And then they had somebody come there for his exhibition. And so that's really how it started, and then
That's amazing.
yeah. And then, from there, other people sort of followed. So
yeah, I can imagine. I mean, in 3 months, you got in 12 publications and you didn't have any experience, and you got him in Forbes. And somehow, I don't know how you did it. Maybe you'll tell me, but you got to the right people through their gatekeepers to get the story across. So
yeah,
how did you do that?
Well, I think for me, the statement ignorance is bliss, I think is pretty on point, because I actually think there's a certain benefit to that because, I'm not afraid. Like I would contact like CEOs of medical insurance companies. I would speak to their assistants. I became friends with these people, and not because I was trying to use anybody. I was trying to really like work together and figure out and build relationships, because for me, it's really about building relationships. It's not,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sending this person and it's a once off. And then you kind of use people. Like I've never done that.
Yeah.
So for me, it was just like, people were like, like, how do you do that? I'm like, they just people. Take away their title, they just people. And that's how I look at every single person, whether I'm targeting a big CEO of a big company or, a editor or journalist of a publication. And as long as you're respectful and nice, and, some of them are not nice, like
Of
they're like,
course.
well, they get a gazillion pictures a day, like they're rude. These people can be very rude, but as long as you keep your countenance and your manners, and you maintain a good rapport with people, at some point people will warm to you, because it's not, oh, okay, they're just using me for 5 minutes so they can get something and they can move on. Because
Right.
for me, it's like I want to be able to say to them, I'm giving you really great content because I have really good people, and in return you obviously publishing and they're getting exposure. So everybody wins, you know, and I kind of look at it like that. And I also look at it from the client perspective of saying that there are other ways and other people that I can open my network to. And this is also where people need to understand the benefit of network. So, and it's not going to hundreds of, you know, conferences and rah. It's just, you know, it's about maintaining those relationships and building those relationships. So that's, I just am fearless like that. I'm like, and actually, I don't want to mess around. I don't want to deal with some menial person that has no brain, that can't make a decision. So I want to go to the top person and say, I've got this. This is really good. This is worth your while, you know. And then deal directly with them.
Absolutely.
Rather than dealing with 500 gatekeepers.
Exactly. Well, look, I mean, my father always used to say, Kelly, if you have an issue or if you need something or if you want to get something done, go straight to the top. And there's always a way to find out how to contact that person. And that's what I do. And you know what? It saves a lot of time and energy.
100%.
So
100%.
Yeah. So now you've worked with hundreds of clients, which I think is going to be huge. And you recently became the dedicated publicist for the Compass Sports and Entertainment division, which is perfect because of all of the experience you have in those industries. And you're doing such a bang up job. Like, it's just amazing.
Thank you.
To see you work. So it's really exciting for me that our division gets to work with you. And I think it's really exciting for them too. And and in addition to that, you have your own podcast, Chat with Black, which has over 300 episodes. And we'll put the links to your social media and your podcast and everything in the show notes. But what made you decide to start a podcast?
So there were a number of reasons. The one was I was getting sick and tired of seeing celebrities interviewing celebrities or business, you know, the top people. And, you know, I had this conversation actually earlier with someone where it was like, you know, everybody's like all these, you know, famous people or coaches are interviewing one another, but they're never giving people who are doing great things in this world the opportunity to tell their story.
Yeah.
And so for me, a number of things was there's, like I've said, there's so many people doing great things in so many industries that just have an amazing story to tell. And it just isn't being shared. And everybody has a story. I mean, some is more interesting than others, of course, but at the end of the day, everybody has a story. So for me, you know, because of the network and the people that have supported me in the past and even currently, you know, I wanted to share their stories and get their stories out. I also believe that it is a good lead generator. And also, I think one of the things that I really realized, you know, more this year, and it's funny because even when you tap back into your network, maybe you dealt with some people pre-pandemic or even 10 years ago, but you then suddenly remember those people, and then it's like, oh, you have something that would be maybe beneficial or interesting to them. So it was always about not going in just asking people for something, but also to be able to say, I have something I would like to be able to share your story, which builds a relationship within that industry. And so I think just understanding that connecting with people in different industries is so invaluable because, you know, whether you're interviewing a pilot, like I've interviewed, you know, Virgin Atlantic pilots and, you know, and so on. So for me, it's like to be able to say, oh my goodness, I have like a network which is so valuable, and that it's, you know, I've got people in aviation, I've got people in real estate, I've got people. So that those connection points are so invaluable and can be so beneficial for the network within what you're already doing, whether it's the PR or talent finders, and to be able to connect people. And I think the power of connection and the power of storytelling is amazing. So
absolutely.
that's the reason I started the podcast.
Well, I love that. And you do it really regularly, and I think you do it really well. So people should listen to it. You'll hear some really interesting stories. And if you're looking, I don't know how much time Kerrin has right now, but if you're looking for a publicist, I could not recommend somebody better than Kerrin. I mean, she has gotten me editorial stories in publications that are real estate related, and in places like Forbes and all of those places, but also in like Maxim and Glamour and GQ and those types of publications, and also television spots. And it's really great because as somebody who's in my career, that adds credibility if you can talk about your industry and what's going on in the market and whatnot publicly. So thank you, Kerrin. And to anybody who's looking, you should reach out to Kerrin. Hopefully she'll have time. She's a busy lady.
No, thank you. I always have space and time. I always make it work. So
I know you do. I don't think you sleep.
I don't actually. I don't sleep very well at night. So my brain is like doing flip-flags most of the time.
So what would you tell a young woman who wants to become an entrepreneur, but maybe didn't come from a family or a situation like you, where you were on your own at school and had to kind of like do things for yourself without guidance, or a family that's that's entrepreneurial, where they didn't have that role model and could, learn lessons from watching their role model? So what advice would you give a young woman or a young man, or anybody for that matter, on becoming an entrepreneur? What's the most important thing?
I think first and foremost, I think for me, I would personally say to people, you have to really dig deep, and you really have to be resilient, because at the end of the day, it's very difficult. There's a lot of rejection that comes with it. And I think the current narrative that gets portrayed about entrepreneurship, and look at the Kardashians, or look at these people, but everybody's circumstances is different. And at the end of the day, it is not glamorous, and there are more tears and heartbreak and emotional meltdowns, which we've all had on multiple occasions,
myself included.
But and it's hard, but I think that in this day and age, with the way technology is, with the way the world is moving so fast, and with so many things, I feel like, yes, it comes with risk. Of course, anything comes with risk, even going and working for a corporation. You could have a job today and be out of a job tomorrow, and I know that they're more ruthless in the US than they are in countries like South Africa, because there's a lot of unions in South Africa, and you can't just fire people because people will take you, to unions, and, there'll be court cases and whatnot. But at the end of the day, my advice always is, at least you're in control to a degree of your own future. And I just feel like you've just got to dig really deep. And if you really want something bad enough, you will find a way to make it work and make it happen. And I mean, I know this because when I left South Africa, a lot of people didn't think I would ever leave. And I left South Africa, and I was a nomadic entrepreneur, so to speak, for 4 years, up until the, COVID hit. And then, I've slept in, couches in Hell's Kitchen, where we were mice running around, and trying to hustle business in New York, and so on. So, and across many countries. But I think that if you really want something bad enough, you'll find a way, but also I do want to say that it comes with an immense amount of sacrifice. So you have to be willing to sacrifice. You cannot be like, oh, I want my, big TV, and, I want, all these luxuries. And when I get this money, I'm going to go and buy houses and cars, because that is not the reality. The reality is reinvesting back into your business, rebuilding building and climbing and expanding your business. So
Yeah.
I just think that there needs to be a reality check, because of course there are varying degrees of entrepreneurs. I mean, some entrepreneurs, if you look at the Hilton family and you look at the Kardashians, they had the father's name and they had that to their benefit. I don't judge them for it. I mean, that's their journey. But at the end of the day, that's not, for me, what a real entrepreneur represents. A real entrepreneur, I know people that literally built their fortune from ground zero with no trust fund money, no, mommy and daddy giving you whatever. There was none of that. And that to me represents a true entrepreneur. And of course, no one says when you get to a place where things are good that you can't have a nice life or you can't, buy a nice home. But I think that there is a big delusion behind what a real entrepreneur and what the real journey is. So all I can say is just keep going and never give up, and you will get there. I mean, I know it's probably the most cliche line, but honestly, you really just have to. And when it gets tough, you have to dig deep. You have to find a way, and you have to dig deep. So
yeah,
that would be my advice.
I think that's good advice
for entrepreneurs.
So and going back to all of those tears and tough times, which we've all meltdowns, which I've had. I think my brain explodes at least once a week. Luckily, it's on the inside, and most people don't see it. But that builds character, right? I think you only get better from that. You only get tougher from that. Rejection only makes you stronger.
100%.
Yeah. And I know that you do not take no for an answer. And I think that's something that people really need to understand. And somebody else, actually a few people who have been guests on my podcast have said similar things. But one of my guests in particular, Amir Karengi, I believe his exact terminology was naive confidence.
100%.
Which is basically like, I'm going to get this done, and not thinking that there's any way it's not going to happen, because then you just do it and you go for it. And if something goes this way, you find a way to get it back on track. And I fully believe that you can't be fearful. You have to go back to that 3-year-old child that's willing to go on the craziest roller coaster while the adults are freaking out in the line. And have no fear.
And also, I do want to say one thing is that you really do need to dance to the beat of your own drum and not be intimidated. I mean, of course, our parents grew up in traditional ways because their parents, that's how they grew up. So sometimes we were like, oh, take a traditional route, you must be a lawyer or you must be a doctor, but not everybody has that inspiration or aptitude to do that. So, I mean, one of the things that I will say from a South African perspective, because I don't think a lot of people really necessarily understand, and I guess this has also been where my resilience came in, and is that I traveled. I mean, I literally left South Africa. I got on a plane. I landed in Scandinavia. I'd never been on Scandinavian soil. I lived in Norway for 4 months. I was living basically off a currency that is just terrible against the dollar, the euro, the pound, even Norwegian kroner, which is not great against the pound or whatever.
Yeah.
And and just finding a way in all of that with a very bad currency and still coming out to be able to build what I've built. And this has taken 7 years, and none of us are where we're better from where we were, but it's still the ambition to be even better and do even better. So
well, keep climbing. Keep climbing, my friend. I'm going to do the same. So now it's time for my fearless 5 questions. So you get 5 questions and 2 passes. So you don't have to answer 2 if you don't want to. You can say pass.
Okay.
Okay.
Cool.
So the first question is a question I ask everybody because I love hearing the different answers to it. Is there something that you think most people value on that you don't necessarily subscribe to or put value on, and why?
Yeah, so that's a good question. I do think so. I think a lot of people place a lot of value on external and materialistic consumption. And, I guess for me, maybe the pandemic kind of raised my consciousness in this level where I went through a phase in that part was like, well, why are we just wanting to consume all these things, like from an external perspective, when we actually should be really working on ourselves and seeing how we can make a difference in the world. So I think a lot of people place. Oh, and the one other thing I do think, and I know because I'm guilty of this myself, is the opinion of others. And I think people place a lot of value on external opinion because of their own insecurities and not actually having the faith to believe in themselves.
Yeah.
So I think working on that is very difficult because I think we're all challenged with that to a degree. And I think social media does not help in that manner because I think people paint a rosy picture, but in reality, it's not that way, because when you speak to people behind closed doors, it's a very different circumstance and situation.
Oh,
so I
1,000%.
definitely think so.
Yeah. Good answer. So are you the type of person that would get on that roller coaster, or are you the person that's freaking out in line?
I think I'm the one that freaks out in line.
Yeah.
I've been on a couple of those and came off and puked my guts out afterwards.
I love them. And I was terrified of them as a kid to the point where I would throw a tantrum if like there was a little hill on a ride. But I love them now, but I am terrified before I get on. And if I go on a second time, I'm even more terrified because I already know what the first time was like. So, okay, chocolate or vanilla?
Chocolate. Absolutely.
You're a chocolate girl.
I'm a chocoholic.
Where would you like to go next in the world? Like, what's on your bucket list?
Wow, there's a lot of places. I mean, I definitely want to do Iceland because, I think that there's a lot of opportunity. Well, I think it's very like health, and there's the health lagoons and that people are in, or swim in. But for me, I'd love to go to Lake Como in Italy. I know that sounds very glamorous, and I haven't obviously been to Greece. So yeah, there's a couple of places in Europe that I'd love to actually do Lapland and the Huskies. I like these different things. And my one thing that I do want to do, which hopefully you'll get to do next year as well, is the Northern Lights in Norway.
Yes, that sounds unbelievable.
Yeah, because for me, because I guess my journey started in Norway, I do have a special connection to Norway, and it's just a phenomenally beautiful country. I mean, it's really like out of a storybook. You can't explain it to people that haven't actually been there. I mean, you can see pictures, but when you're actually like, on a ferry in between these big fjords and things, it's just mind-blowing. So
absolutely.
Yeah,
absolutely. Okay. And
see polar bears and orcas, because I'm a huge polar bear and orca fan, but in their natural environments.
Yes, of course. I agree with you. Okay. And so my last question, if you had the opportunity to fly to the moon or Mars, would you? Or would you stay here?
Wow.
I know you're a big Tesla fan.
I'd probably say if I had to choose between the two, if I didn't have any alternative choice, I'd probably say the moon.
I asked because I know that you're a Tesla fan.
Yes.
And,
yes.
Maybe at some point people will be living on Mars.
Yes.
That are all descendants of Elon Musk. So,
I mean, he's amazing. I think the reason, I'm not saying by any means I know him or I have a personal connection to him, but I think because he grew up in South Africa, I understand the history. I read his book that was written by Ashley Vance. The diverse background of growing up in South Africa. He was bullied I mean, he's obviously on the autistic spectrum of things. So I get it. So I feel like on that level, I relate to him, which kind of drives me to want to, I don't want to be like Elon, but it motivates me and drives me to want to build an impact and change people's lives. So
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's amazing. I think you are already doing that. And I will say, you're a very good friend. You are not only good at your job, but you are an incredible friend. And I appreciate you. And I appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you, Kelly. And the same to you. I appreciate you very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching and listening to Kelly Minds Her Manners. Make sure to subscribe to the show and don't forget to leave us a review to tell us what you liked about the episode. You can connect with Kelly at Kelly Minds Her Manners on Instagram and TikTok or on our website, www.kellymindshermanners.com.